that's fine. So I'll just move everything over. So it'll record me continuing to write on slides, but that's fine. Funnily enough, I just got off the phone with a college where we're doing a lot of cultural competency workshops, and we were talking about examples of integrating Māori concepts or topics across different learning streams, you know, different curriculum areas. So yeah, herein lies the beginning of this process of perhaps doing a bit of a case studies for people. So nothing like being pioneers. Let's get started with our opening karakia though. All right, me noi tātou, tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia te here tāngata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. Okay, so we've just been putting together a Matariki update video, which will be available to all your staff as well, obviously, who are on the journey for next term. And as we were putting that together, we've just edited in some clips from Rangi Matamua, our Matariki man, or our mātanga tātai kōkōrangi, so our astronomy expert, Māori astronomy expert, and he really put it quite simply, you know. So I've taken his whakaaro and turned it into this little diagram here. He said Matariki is about 3 things. So that's our top 3 boxes, thanks to Google Slides, looking good. Remembering the past. And I don't know if you remember, back in last July, we looked at that whakatauki ka mua, ka muri, taking our lessons and looking back into the past, you know, as we move into the future. And there's many variations on that whakatauki. If I had to put a whakatauki to what Rangi is describing, I would use that one. So the simple version was ka mua, ka muri. Ka mua, looking at what's ahead, ka muri, looking at what's behind. Okay, those are our words that mean behind and in front of, but also time, obviously the time ahead and the time in the past. So the longer version of that whakatauki is I walk into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. Okay, so here, so when we're thinking about the past, remember we have our star Pōhutukawa that reminds us of all of those who have passed away, in particular within the last 12 months since the last rising of the Matariki cluster. And that's all tied up with Māori narratives around what happens in the afterlife, you know, with and the journey that those souls go on, in particular over that year. So there's some beautiful kōrero around that, and a waka that's made up of stars in the sky. And you can find that information, and generally that information's in Rangi Matamua's sort of hour to hour and a half long lectures on YouTube anyway, if you're interested in exploring that a bit more. But the other aspect of remembering the past is that what this whakatauki talks about, which is taking wisdom from the past. Now that's wisdom from our own personal experiences. Obviously, if you're a child, you haven't had many previous experiences, but as we grow, you know, that sort of kete expands. But within Te Ao Māori, there's a massive, you know, acknowledgement through the idea of whakapapa that all of the lessons and knowledge and wisdom and you know, oral histories and you name it, teachings, learnings, wānanga, mātauranga, from our ancestors is passed through into the next generation. And whakapapa is the thing that connects that, right? Remember whakapapa being the organizational system of knowledge within Te Ao Māori, the thing that connects everything, connectedness or relatedness. So you'll often hear phrases such as taonga tuku iho, taonga being treasures, something that's highly valued. Tuku means to send, iho from above, so from beyond. So if you're thinking family tree wise or whakapapa, you know, taonga tuku iho, the things of value that have been passed down. So that idea of a continuum of knowledge happening from way back when, from the beginning of creation, you know, which is all ties in with our Matariki story, right? Coming down into the future. So Rangi Matamua puts it as remembering those who make us who we are. So that's a really awesome big concept, going beyond just I'm sad because my grandma died, into exploring, what skills and knowledge and wisdom and that has been passed down from all of your ancestors, not just the ones that you can remember passing away while you were alive. So I think that's a really, really big topic. If you're trying to connect it into Matariki, you're looking at that star Pohutukawa. Okay, because she accompanies, those who've passed away within the last 12 months, etc. But the bigger concept that that's representing is, everything that's gone before us on Earth and etc. Okay, sorry, was that Tracy, your question there?
Yep. So I think you just answered it then, Anita, thanks. It was the remembering the past, and in previous, I guess, Matariki celebrations, we've remembered people who've passed before the last year, so it's okay and it's appropriate to celebrate those or acknowledge those that might have passed 10, 15 years ago.
Exactly. It's all throughout history since the beginning of time, really.
Right. So not just the last,
isn't it? Yeah, and it's this idea of time, Western time being linear. Rangi also talks about that. I might actually play that clip. Because he talks about how Māori always lived in harmony with the seasons. They didn't even have a word for year. The word for year, tau, was taken, meaning the word season. So that probably segues quite nicely into celebrating the present. So his, what does he call it? He calls it ngā tau e toru. So it's a 3-year calendar system, but it's a combination of a lunar calendar system, a solar calendar system, and a sort of seasonal calendar system. So all of that happening outside of our Gregorian calendar, which just is very, very linear, day after day, etc., etc. So thinking of time perhaps not so, yes, a continuum, because it does march forward, but there's also aspects that repeat every season, aren't there, on an annual basis. So once again, sort of getting out of our Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, January, February, March, 2021, 2022 kind of mindset, and thinking, well, actually there's, from an observational perspective of our environment and the lessons from the past, we know that at certain times of year, certain days, all of these things happen. And that's really the basis for the Māori system of time, which is this combination of sort of solar, lunar, massive amounts of environmental observation, and every phase of the moon, like on every day, having a completely different name, and different aspects that belong to it, and all of that wisdom that's accumulated literally over generations of people, so essentially, I guess, what's a good way of putting it, in our present, we benefit from all of the observations, lessons and wisdoms of everyone that's come before us, whether it's 1 or 2 generations ago or 500 generations, they've all passed something on, whether it was developing a digging tool or, whatever it is, technology in our case, I guess, Zoom, yay, that will be something that's taken into the future. So yeah, I think that's very applicable to almost any subject, any topic, whether you're doing well-being or nutrition or whatever, so just thinking off the top of my head, even looking at something like nutrition, like I can remember learning that in New Zealand, the average height had risen by 17 centimetres or something from 1900 to the year 2000. What does that tell us about nutrition that's obviously been learnt, over the last few years? One of our kayako, she's gone back to something that she calls a tipuna diet. So tipuna being ancestors. So she's Māori, so she's gone back to the ancestral diet that her forebears ate, i.e. pre-colonisation and all of the lovely stodgy food that the English brought with them, because she's figuring that's the best for her health. So yeah, really, really interesting. So I think that's just remembering the past could take you could teach on that for a few years, couldn't you? So moving into the present, our purpose behind Matariki is this whole idea, which is kind of similar probably to what we sort of traditionally do around Christmas anyway, even though it's at the wrong time of year, as the Rangi Matamua points out, because traditionally, if we look at our seasonal kind of calendar, winter is the time where it's the time where you rest and you recuperate. You know, you've gathered all your food, etc. over the summer, you've worked hard. So we shouldn't actually be having our holidays in the heat of summer. That should be our most productive, busy time if we are living in sync with our environment. So he talks a lot about being in sync with what's around you. So I think that idea of being in sync or synchronized with, tuned into, that's why the tuning into our environment's kind of across the bottom there, because that is sort of the fourth aspect. So coming together, especially with kai, food, you know, which is part of every culture's, you know, social fabric, isn't it? Whānau, I described it as sharing and celebrating our talents and gifts and blessings, because pretty much any activity, whether it's some sort of art, craft, sport, kapahaka type stuff, waiata, it all happens in Matariki. That's why it's a fantastic, you know, topic to be able to link into almost any area of learning. Well, any area, I'll say, not almost any, because you can link it everywhere. So when we have a little bit of a look towards the end of our session tonight on all of the different things that, I guess it's ways that people can come together to celebrate Matariki, you know, everything's in there. There's not really anything missing from activities that you would normally associate with people congregating and coming together, whether it's for a concert or sports or play or food, you know. So that's the present. So how can we sort of link that into perhaps some of the stuff that Life Ed are doing? Well, you know, it's all of your mindfulness, being present, social relationships, you know, everything all rolled into one. So once again, that covers a large percentage of, you know, the areas that you're going into, including, you know, stuff like looking after yourself, you know, all of that stuff that's across the bottom, you know. So, and then when we come into looking for the future, so planning to the future is our hiwa iterangi or hiwa. So sometimes it's sort of translated as a wishing star, but to be honest, I think that's a bit of a sort of colonizer kind of view, simplifying it down a bit. You know, hiwa was the star who would, you know, people would share their hopes and dreams for the next year, and so it's this reminder to be thinking about our future, planning for our future, in particular over the next 12 months, but certainly beyond. But that process also revolves on reflecting on our past year, our present needs, and our hopes and dreams. So it is that not just planning for the future and ignoring the past. We come back to that whakatauki again, ka mua ka muri. You can only plan for the future if you've gone back and sort of, you know, looked at your past. So I think in terms of perhaps a well-being kind of perspective that may, you know, crop up in your guys' planning for your schools and tamariki is all of the stuff that we sort of talked about in remembering the past, looking back at our actions and behaviours, you know, making different decisions in the future, you know, making friends, you know, being kinder to people. You know, there's so many different things. Often within a school context, we might talk about learning goals and things like that, and just sort of getting kids to explore what their future looks like and what's important to them. I think there's a real lack of perhaps forward planning that I can see in younger generations now. They've got many rangatahi have young people have no idea what they're passionate about, what they're going to do in their future, and it's not necessarily knowing at age 10 that you want to be a, you know, a postal worker or a doctor or a teacher or whatever. It's, you know, kind of, so I think in that planning for the future and celebrating the present, we can really assist our tamariki with thinking about stuff that they do enjoy and they are passionate about, you know, and thinking about pathways and stuff like that. So with the older kids, you know, you can contextualize it within things like subject choices if you want to think about that. But I think let's expand it out of that traditional kind of, it's all related to school, you know. Are they thinking about the fact that they really enjoy people, you know? So when they're thinking about a future career, we've got to think about a people job. You know, are they, we can think about the ways that people learn, you know, kinesthetic and visual and all of that. I don't know, there'd be so much stuff that would sort of come under that, eh? You know, how can we use our existing skills and talents and I guess stuff we're passionate about and good at, because we're all good at different things, to channel that into the future. We can have a look at that there. No, okay, all right, I'm just teaching. Okay, all right, thanks, Dad. See ya. Sorry, just had to pick up the eldest from tennis. Doesn't understand Zoom. Now, what was I going to say? Where were we? Yeah, so that's sort of, I think there's a whole lot we can do with all of that. When we flick down onto our bottom box, our black box down the bottom, tuning into our environment. So obviously that means our natural environment around us, but I also think it's important to think about coming back to that whare tapawha thing, you know, it's our mental environment and, you know, it's everything, our spiritual environment, physical, our body and, you know, the whenua that's around us. So I think that's important to expand out that concept. It's not, you know, so environmentalism in and of itself is a really, really key theme of Matariki. And I think we could see that with all of the links of all the different stars into the environment. But Rangi Matamua, after he talks about these three aspects and talks about environmentalism and how Matariki is an expression of some really, really important values within Tau Māori and just within society in general. The ones that he picked out were kotahitanga, whanaungatanga and kaitahi, but he could have gone on, so I've expanded on his kōrero a bit. So kotahitanga, collaboration, unity, coming together to do stuff, you know, that's becoming one, diversity and inclusion, you know, however you want to translate that. Whanaungatanga being the building of relationships, so social skills, you know, connections with family, friends, you know, whatever, and strengthening those, you know, that idea that you can't live, no man is an island, you know, and I think that's a very, very important concept, which I'm sure comes into many life education classrooms around the country, you know, that we need relationships with others, you know, we're not put on earth to do life alone, you know, so even just things like reaching out for help, you know, those simple sort of messages. Yeah, we've got another colleague that's putting together some workshops for suicide prevention, I think, or something like that, empowering women workshops, you know, and from a Māori perspective, once again, you know, Matariki is right there with a lot of those really important kōrero and conversations, which don't necessarily happen, but there's probably, you know, there's a bit of public education and awareness out there now, isn't there, about things like anxiety, depression, suicide. So I think being present in our environment and being aware of the past and the future and that we're part of something that's bigger than us, I think all those ideas of belonging, which is all tied up in our pepeha and cultural identity, that all sort of comes with those two ideas of kotahitanga and whanaungatanga. Okay, so I added in manaakitanga, the idea of kaitahi, you know, that everyone coming together for food. Now, we'd know from those of you who've done our course last term, mana is, you know, our respect, esteem, authority, power, etc. Aki means to encourage or honour. So the process of manaki is this cycle of honouring and respecting one another, building each other up, edifying each other. And within a Māori worldview, that's traditionally expressed, you know, in a marae with that's what's often translated as hospitality, but I don't think that translation does it much justice. So this idea of living in harmony might be another way of putting it, you know, everything based on aroha, not ripping others down, we're always building each other up, respecting one another, you know, so that's, once again, pretty much how our interactions that are happening via kotahitanga whanaungatanga, you know, are happening, and how do our actions and thoughts and words, you know, influence others, and how are we influenced by them? I think it's probably another thing that pops up in life ed classrooms, no doubt. Yeah, and then that last one there, kai tiakitanga. Remember, tiaki means to protect, to guard, to look after, to steward. So the concept of kai tiakitanga is often just taken as sort of something kind of probably like environmentalism or conservation, but we can actually be kaitiaki of anything. And the important aspect, probably when you're looking at well-being, is that we have to be a good kaitiaki of our own mind and body. You know, we're the ones that can protect our mind by not taking on other people's negativity or, you know, reaching out to others. We're the kaitiaki of what we put into our body physically with food, you know, so once again, that concept can be linked into probably almost everything you're teaching as well. And this is the beauty of planning your content from a Māori perspective, gives you a very, very broad base. So rather than planning your content from an English perspective and then trying to add Māori stuff in, flipping it around and come from the Māori concepts first, because everything flows out of them. Does that make sense? So it might be a little bit different. So rather than thinking, oh, you know, I've got this, I'm doing this thing on well-being, I've got to try and tack in something Māori, just flip it over, you know, which is probably a bit of a skill that needs to be developed over time. But I think because our Māori concepts are so broad, you know, even the calendar system, look at that, you know, it's a lot easier than saying, how do you normally feel in July? People will just look at you weirdly. But in Rangi Matamua's video, you know, he goes on to give a few examples about listening to certain bird calls and knowing, you know, and there was another, I was watching Indigenous 100. It's a great series that they interviewed 100 Indigenous leaders, but on TVNZ at the moment, and if you look up on demand, if you look up Indigenous 100, there's a series of, was it 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 videos, and on one in particular, it's about Mātauranga Māori, and it's got Rangi on it, and another guy, I can't remember his name right now, but he's from up north, so a different area from Rangi, and he's another maramataka kind of expert. And they were both giving examples. And so this other guy from up north gave an example of being in a school somewhere, and someone asked him, who wasn't Māori, you know, we need to go out and have a look at the river and you know, see if it's polluted or not. And he said, well, I can tell you right now that it is polluted. So he took the children outside of the classroom and they stood there and they listened. And of course they could hear nothing because there's obviously no bird life. And in that particular place at that time of year, there should have been kōtuku, white herons. And of course they would have been the sound of them getting food and feeding their young. And I just thought that was a really cool example of the fact that if we do tune into our environment, in that case it was the physical outdoor whenua and birds, you know, so linking in things like, there's a lot of whakatauki for when summer start, it's all about hearing the noises of the cicadas, you know, or seeing certain flowers in bloom. So I think that kind of stuff, and it may just be that you actually just take the children outside of the mobile classroom and, you know, wherever you are, and I think that would be a really good teaching opportunity, you know, and sort of saying, well, actually, what can you hear? You know, if you can't hear any birds, well, clearly that means something's wrong. You know, what can you see? Not many trees, or there's only farmland, for example. That means there used to be forest there, and has there been slips? And so, because a lot of our place-based learning that's coming into the curriculum now, schools are meant to be having a lot more localized content, and it's something that most schools, I think, are struggling to get their head around. But actually all they need to do is just have a walk around their local neighbourhood, look at the streams, look at the hills, you know, think about what was there and what's there now, and you know, look at the cliff falling down by the beach, or the, you know, the fact that a normal stream's now been put into a stormwater drain, you know, and there's no fish in it, something like that. Yeah, so I think it is a big concept, and I think just little elements, you know, linking into all of these things we've been talking about. So the other aspect of tuning into our environment is this idea that in winter you stop taking from the environment. So think about a food perspective there. It's probably also ties in quite well to the celebrating the present, being mindful of where we are, thankful for what we've got. You know, so although Rangi is talking about it from a physical environment perspective, I think it ties in with our celebrating the present, where we are being thankful for the gifts and blessings that we have in our life. And whether that's just whānau, or the fact you've got a roof over your head and enough food on the table, versus, you know, being thankful for fine weather, or, you know, that you've got an unpolluted water supply, or, you know, whatever it may be. There's lots of links. And so finally, Matariki is about returning home. So I think last week we compared it to Chinese New Year, where everyone goes home traditionally, you know, and there's millions of people, billions transferring all over the country. We could even look at somewhere like America, you know, everyone goes home for Thanksgiving. And we know in our own culture here in Aotearoa, we probably do that around Christmas, you know, being that time. So I think there's probably a time of year within every culture. So I think this is a really awesome way for us to get our tamariki thinking about, well, what time of year is that in your culture? So I'm thinking about things like Diwali and Chinese New Year, and you know, I think about like the New Year across Asia, for example. I mean, that's actually in winter, isn't it? In their season. So where have those celebrations come from? It could be quite interesting. Looking from a Muslim perspective, like I have no idea what the answer is, but why has Ramadan happened right now? I don't know. But you know, it could be really interesting to perhaps link in some other cultures around this and just use Matariki as a talking point, because that idea of coming back to family, coming back to your roots, your tūranga waiwai, ukaipo, etc., is, you know, it's a really important part of people's social fabric, whanaungatanga connections, and all of that. So this idea of, yeah, of returning to your base, returning to your roots, ancestral home. And once again, whenua, we know within Tau Māori is the same word as placenta, so it's the sustainer of life. So that comes back into these whakaaro we've shared here around appreciating our environment, being thankful, you know, for what's gone on in the past, what we've got now, and for the future. So I hope that little kōrero helps. That's what I've prepared for tonight. And then we'll spend the rest of the session going through the different stars and perhaps working through some ideas. So should we just pause here and see if anyone's got any comments, or is there any area of your guys' curriculum that I've kind of missed? Because obviously I'm not inside the organisation, so I don't necessarily know what everyone's doing every day.
There's a totally on point comment there from Maria, actually, Anita, where she says, seems that Matariki is a great way to highlight whakapapa to children, that everything is connected. Yes. And I was thinking the same thing during that last part of what you've just said, that in those weeks and leading up to Matariki, a great conversation starter with the school prior to going in, or once you get there, is, you know, has the school been doing anything around Matariki? And, you know, as our educators do, always make sure that they're connecting with what's happening at the moment in the school, what's on top. Yeah. So that would seem a really, good thing to do.
Yeah, and I think let's just remember that most schools won't have a clue about the depth of Matariki, because once again, this is still fairly new information. It was only around 2017 that Rangi Matamua started, you know, sharing his knowledge from his whakapapa, you know, handed down to him. So in our Matariki update video, which after this I finally get to watch the final version, we've actually pulled out, there's 3 clips in there from Rangi. One is him talking about how he got into this pathway, where he's acknowledging his whakapapa. The second one is where he's talking about the origin of the name of Matariki. And it also sort of talks a little bit to that colonization, overlaying, you know, the traditional knowledge. And then the third clip is where he's talking about his lunar solar seasonal calendar and these ideas here. So we can certainly make that available for everyone to watch anyway, because it also talks about what we're doing, you know, with our kura for next term. But I think those 3 clips in particular could be really good little things to include in your lesson planning, you know. The one where he's talking about how we got onto this pathway is probably about 5-6 minutes. You might not want to have something that long, but the other 2 are a bit shorter, sort of 3 to 5 minutes, maybe something like that. Yeah. So especially the one where he's talking about getting in sync with the environment. It's just so kind of like mind-blowing. And I think for a lot of people, you know, we're all raised in this linear calendar system, aren't we, where time does march on one thing after the other, and it can be a bit depressing, really, if you just sort of think, oh, another day, this idea of Groundhog Day, you know, kind of thing. It's not very motivating or encouraging, is it? So yeah, I think those clips in particular, that's why I've pulled them out to add into our Matariki video. They could be quite powerful tools. So it could be, we can pop some stuff up like that on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, so that you guys can easily publicly access it. And I think when we've selected little particular bits like that, it makes it a bit more digestible for the schools, rather than saying, you know, oh, go away and watch a 1.5 hour presentation. Although they all should be doing that, because that's really only the way to learn about Matariki is from Rangi Matamua, you know, they might they might not always do that. So that could be something that could be sent out to schools in advance saying, hey, this is what we're focusing on. This is some of the background information that our educators are bringing to Matariki this year. And, even to say perhaps just this diagram here, could also be useful. So perhaps we can just put together a little bit of a Matariki pack, perhaps, which may include, just a little PDF or something. And maybe those video clips, that could be something that's helpful. All right,
Lovely.
any more questions or comments at this point? No, we're all good. Okay, so let's go into our next bit. I thought, hang on, I've done it on the next page. So this is the bit where I'm sort of still doing it as I go. Let's just look at the individual stars. So we did learn a little bit last week. So these images, I've just popped them off the Te Wānanga Aotearoa website about Matariki. They've got a really great booklet there as well, which you can download. So we might just have a look at that before we've finished as well. So their explanation of Matariki. Matariki is the star that signifies reflection, hope, our connection to the environment, and the gathering of people. Matariki is also connected to the health and well-being of people. So in many ways, you could call Matariki the oranga star, which is really our word for well-being or health, thriving, etc. So I guess let's kind of dive into a lot of the topics that you've got coming up for next term. And see, what ones can you guys see in connecting into the actual star of Matariki. So let's get everyone sharing, and we'll do a bit of brainstorming on behalf of the rest of the educating team. That requires some people to unmute.
I love it, Anita. I love it. And this is not me now, because you all know far more than I do.
Exactly, yes. Tracy and I are in the dark, so we need to be enlightened by the people out in the field. Maria, what links can you see into the star of Matariki based on that description down the bottom there?
Also, Jackie's unmuted as well.
Jackie, yeah. So let's just think about all the topics you've got coming up for next term, and obviously me and Tracy don't know what those are. I've tried to allude to all of them, but which specific topics do you think would connect into what Matariki, the star of Matariki, not the whole cluster, etc., ties to?
I'm doing friendships with juniors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so with our friendship with juniors, definitely the gathering of people, so we can see that whanaungatanga or whakawhanaungatanga.
I'm thinking resilience as well, because in order to be resilient, you've got to have hope of something better.
Yeah.
So resilience, we do a lot of teaching around resilience and what resilience means.
Yeah, okay. No, definitely. Because the reflection aspect is looking at the past, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the hope aspect is looking to the future.
The future.
So although we've got those two individual stars of Hiwa and Pōtikawa representing those aspects, they're kind of brought together within Matariki, the mum.
Yes.
And remember that idea of whakapapa is that idea of reproduction and generations.
Yes.
So that's probably, I don't know why in particular. If we look at our diagram there, it obviously shows someone smaller coming out of the mum as such, and that this idea of wisdom. So we'll just put in there whakapapa as well. Yeah, cool.
Well, I'm thinking also that everything has a hono. I remember you teaching about that in our sessions, that everything has a hono. Again, with the connection, even objects have a hono, as you were explaining.
Yeah, so everything has a connection to past, present, and future, which is the idea of whakapapa, And I think that ties in with that idea that we're not living in isolation, you know, we're part of something bigger. And that's possibly, shall I just put that in there? We are part of something bigger. And so that's bigger than ourselves. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Google. I like that. You know,
I love it.
Yeah, and that ties back into that idea of hope and whānau. Yeah, okay. What about this aspect down here about you know, connection to the environment and gathering of people? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Pip, I said you're unmuted now.
Jane's dropped something in there about that being a connection to kai, to food, and bringing together people to share kai. I think that's a really good example, Jane.
Food is our connection to the environment, and I guess relationships, you know.
Yeah, relationships.
And you see that, like, we've got food allergies in our family, and, you know, a lot of the talk in the food allergy communities I've been in over the years is the fact that, you know, flipping food, it's everywhere. So food is intrinsically tied into the whanaungatanga, you know, and this idea of kai tahi. So kai tahi was what he talks about. Kai meaning food, tahi meaning together as one. Okay, and then I see Jane's also popped in there thinking about mindset, self-talk. Yeah, so our mental well-being. Yeah, and perhaps this is where we could bring in this idea of kaitiaki of our own mind and bodies, I guess, is sort of what we were talking about before. Yeah, no, that's really good. Does anyone else have any comments on that? We'll just keep moving, because there's 9 stars to get through. How much time have we got left? Yeah, okay, so we'll just spend 2 or 3 minutes on each one. Now, YT, I'm going to just copy this in here. So YT is our star to do with fresh water. So if we look at our diagram over on the right hand side there, you can see, so we're talking about rivers and lakes here, with the idea that they all come from the mountain, the maunga, you know, from the snow, obviously. So the things we've got on our diagram here, we have some tuna. So tuna being eels, because that was obviously a major food source in our rivers. And then I believe those other little things that they've got around there are koura, or so it'll be freshwater crayfish and things like that. So we've got Andrea in here connecting into food sustainability. Okay, so let's although that one possibly ties in a bit better with tupua nuku, but it certainly comes in here. So let's just put the idea of sustainability. YT is connected with all freshwater bodies and food sources that are sustained by those waters. So the idea of definitely the ideas of sustainability, nutrition, etc. I think the other thing to link in with water is why water within Te Ao Māori is associated with cleansing, you know, of our minds and bodies. So you'll often hear people talking about, you know, when they go back home, which is that going back home, okay, to whenua. And, you know, I hear a lot of people talking about, you know, immersing themselves in their ancestral waters. So e.g. the awa, the river or the lake. And I was just chatting with someone the other day who has a boat, you know, goes out boating a lot, has a very stressful job, you know, and just this idea that by immersing ourselves in water, not to drown obviously, but, you know, going for a swim, getting back out into nature. So I think this idea of swimming, even things like water safety, you know, so much stuff comes in here, eh? So
would stress management come into there?
I think so. So let's go back to our old whare tapawha. The taha wairua comes in really here. So things like, what did you say? Stress management. Stress management, things just like calming down by reconnecting with nature, you know, and the outdoors. when my own child, my middle child, was going through quite bad depression last the August, September, October lockdown, he found it very calming just to go for a walk and stare over the water, you know. And he goes, it just works, you know. So I think, you know, so even just things like looking out over water as a way to maybe practice mindfulness, you know, and cope with anxiety, you know, stress, depression. I think that's a good one. And what's Pip praised here? Sorry, Pip, can you expand a bit more on what you mean by basic needs?
Just that water is one of our simple needs as a human. We have
Of
made
course.
up so much of water
Yes.
that it's our essential element. Without water, we start to feel ill and suffer. Our brain can't function, our body can't function.
Would it also fit with the environmental responsibilities? What responsibilities?
Sorry, you've faded out there a bit, Pip.
Oh no, that was Michelle.
Oh, Michelle, sorry.
About responsibility, so like from a conservation point of view. So it's sort of like sustainability, but it's also, you know, it's taking care of our local environment. And finding, I'm just thinking of the local one around here and the rubbish collection around the inlet that people are doing. That sort of, how can I make a difference to my world? Sort of
And with our schools, we have, I'll just put links to Pepeha in here. We've sort of been guiding them on their journey. So we've given it, you probably heard me talking about them in the sessions, we've given them each a little unit on their pepeha. They're still coming back to us with these questions of, oh, but localized curriculum. And I'm like, go to the maunga and awa by your school, you know. And so where we can, we've popped in the stuff about all of those like stream cleanup projects and all of that sort of thing, because that's actually what they need to be doing. They actually just be needing to take those tamariki in that kura outside of the four walls of the classroom, you know. And you know, we can look overseas at things like these tree schools and nature-based schools, all of the stuff that they do in Scandinavia where the kids are outside no matter what the weather. You know, they've certainly got better mental health outcomes than anywhere else in the world. And actually better educational outcomes. So I think perhaps, you know, linking people, you know, into that. So I might just put in here looking after our environment. Okay, that was a big one. Well done, everyone. Woohoo. Okay, our next one is waita. So sorry, I'm just sort of doing this as we go. Ran out of time. So our description for waita is associated with the ocean and the food sources within it. So obviously there's a lot of links between Waiti and Waita, and you can possibly do that together, but I think when we come to the ocean, it is a little bit of a different space, you know, than the rivers. Actually, let's just go back over here, and I'm just going to pop rain in there because we forget about rain, good old rain. So I think with the ocean, perhaps I think this is where emotions fit in really, really well. So we can talk about and remember when we talk about atawe, we talk about them as personifications of the natural environment. So there was something yesterday I was thinking, and it was, what did they say? Tangaroa and Tāwhiri Mātia are combining to, you know, make the waves go crazy and, you know, all of this, you know, with the storm, with I think it's Cyclone Philly that's hitting the East Coast at the moment. So for me, looking at the ocean is, you know, the personality of perhaps personality traits, you know, and feelings, you know, expressed, we could just put expressed by Tangaroa. You know, because Tangaroa is the ocean, you know, not the King Neptune image, okay, just the idea, you know, of the ocean. And, you know, we can even see the clouds reflected in the ocean and all the different colours. And I think, you know, for some children, that may actually be a better way of thinking about emotions than just looking at someone's face, you know. And this is where this idea of the narrative narrative therapies and ways of looking at the world. And I was actually chatting with Jo Shelford, she's Buck Shelford's wife, she's on our trust board, and she's actually an expert in sort of rongoa. And so that's so the word rongoa, people often think it means medicine, but rongoa, the concept is making things better, making something better, coming up with a solution. So that's the healing is probably the what we think about there. So I think, you know, this idea of, I don't want to use the word therapy. Shall we just say narrative modalities? Shall we say something like that, you know, exploring emotions. So remember the things that you can look up. You can definitely have a look at the Mahia Atua. So she's involved with Mākandai and Kupua from Mahia Atua, and those are the sort of, I guess, leaders in this sort of mental health and physical well-being space, dealing with it from the perspective of Atua. So personifications of the environment. And, you know, you can link that into certainly, you know, perhaps even just ways that, just thinking, you know, ways that we respond to our own, you know, physical, spiritual, social. What's the other side of Te Whare Tapapa? Physical, taha wairua, taha tinana, taha
Whānau.
oh, mental, taha hinengaro.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so perhaps, I don't know, does anyone else have any thoughts on Tangaroa?
What about the because we live up in the hut, so the river's running to the sea?
Yep. So let's also remember that the constellation represents that, because Waiti is above Waita, okay, in the constellation. And that's that idea of the mountains leading down to the sea. Okay, so once again, we have that links to Pepeha, you know, maunga to moana, I guess we could call it. Yeah, definitely. And obviously we can repeat some of the stuff that's back on the previous slide. So all of that stuff around nutrition, conservation, safety, oh, I don't know, the list kept on going, didn't it?
We also, like, the ocean produces about over 50% of the Earth's oxygen.
Oh, it does. Yes, I remember. And plankton or something have got a big thing to do that oxygen production from the ocean. Yeah, so you know, the oceans. I guess we're leading into probably some stuff about, you know, ecosystems perhaps along those lines. Right. Anything else, or should we move on to our next star?
I've just got one, looking at the emotions part, and just think about how the ocean, you see the surface, but actually there's a lot going on below. So, you know, like, it's often when you think about facial expressions, we might show something above the ocean on the surface.
Iceberg.
Yeah, that sort of idea. That really,
yeah, that's lovely, Michelle. I think that's really cool. Yeah, wow. Oh, I love this session. I apologize for my right, what's the next star in my list? Okay, so Tupu Nuku is our star that joins, that's to do with food. It's basically food on the ground. So it makes us, so our other one, Tupuarangi, is to do with food that comes from above in the forest and that sort of thing. But Tupu Nuku gets us thinking probably about the whenua more than anything. So the description here is Tupua Nuku is the star connected with everything that grows in the soil to be harvested or gathered for food. And let's face it, although yes, we do get food from waterways and all the rest of it, and traditionally that was a massive part of a Māori diet, obviously, these days everything is really coming from the land, more so probably now than ever before, isn't it? So for me, I often think with this one, you know, city kids, they've got no idea of the food chain. You know, absolutely no idea. At a bare minimum, they might know that milk comes from cows. So for me, the food chain, you know, from start to finish, and all the people and, you know, people, land and resources, I guess. Involved in it, you know, there's so much stuff. And so we can also think about our karakia kai, for those of you who were on our sessions last week, I think it was, or the week before, we went through the elements of our karakia kai, where we acknowledged all the different parts of the world that we get food from. Remember, Ranginui was above, and that's all the weather, and Papatūānuku below, and so I'll just put link in with all the relevant atua, because there were a few of them, okay, including Tangaroa and Tane Mahuta and Rongomatane and Haumea. There's all of these different things, right? What other ideas have we got here?
Fits well with nutrition. So, you know, food sources is an area we look at, but also balanced diet, and how balanced diets can look different for different people. So looking at the different nutrients that comes from foods grown.
Yeah, and I think even, you know, the lack of nutrients that's in our soil now, you know, like it's actually quite impossible within New Zealand to get a fully balanced diet, even just with eating meat, fruit and vegetables. For example, we've got no selenium in our soil, and a lot of, if you're lacking in selenium or zinc or, you know, magnesium, that has a massive impact on your body, you know. So a sort of thing that sort of comes into, you know, perhaps what do our bodies need to
just thinking back, Anita, to that first slide and the black box, to what extent are we trying to rest the environment, if you like, so to stop taking from the environment? Does that include not taking from the garden at this time?
Yeah, well, I would have thought so. And so we could look at the idea that whenua, you know, needs a rest. I guess you'd call it planting and harvesting cycles.
Yeah, is that the maramataka? Is that the...
Yeah, so that all ties in with that. Yep, so we could have a look at the maramataka, because the maramataka is fully involved with the collection of food. You know, you only go eeling or fishing on certain days, and you know, plant this time and you harvest at that time. And so that, you know, ties in with that seasonal lunar solar calendar idea. And, you know, obviously you can link that to the needs of human beings, you know, for rest, you know, recuperation, I guess productivity, because even when you look at people, so there's a few Facebook pages that you can follow, where there's one from a lady up north called Henny, and she gives a little daily video on the maramataka for that day. And so there's actually heaps of emotional well-being stuff within the maramataka as well. Like it says, this is a rest day. And so people who I know who are living in a Māori space and are actually essentially following the maramataka as a guide to their daily life, they're very, very in tune with, I guess I'm going to call it work-life balance, you know, like this idea that, you know, this idea of perhaps, you know, don't take on too much. What would you call it? Sort of self-management.
Yeah, work-life balance. So is maramataka kind of a gardening calendar?
Well, it's a calendar for life. So it's got the aspects around the food, planting, harvesting, connection, all that, but it's also full of stuff about what's good for your well-being. This is the day of rest. This is the day for resolving conflict, and how they've tuned those things, and I have no idea. But when you look at the moon, actually, let's go back and add that on here. So I might just put the ecosystems up on that line. The moon pulls the tide, you know, and then there's that idea that we are made of water, you know, and, you know, the moon, question mark, linked to emotions, you know, because our bodies are 80% water. So whether you think that stuff's a bit fluffy or not, it makes you wonder at the, you know, because all of these observations have come down over generations with the maramataka and Matariki and all the rest of it, there's got to be something in it, you know, this idea that on different days of the month, or through this cycle of a month or of a phase, through each phase of the moon, that everything should be in balance, you know. So whether that's from observations from how people were feeling on different days or blah, 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 or whether it's just a logical way of actually looking at the world, of pacing yourself, you know, it could be quite interesting to explore. Personally, it's not something I know a lot about. All I know is from the posts I've seen on Facebook of the different phases of the moon every day. They're always warning you to either rest or do this or be productive on that day. So I think it's possibly a really good model to perhaps explore a bit more. Perhaps that'll be our PLT for next year. And I know a bit more, because our unit next year for Matariki is called Maramataka. So I'll be the first to admit that I'm not a complete guru in that area. So anyway, so that's tupuanuku. So tupuanuku is all the food that grows in the ground. Okay, so kumara, etc., and it links into a few different atua there. So I'll just put in here links to, so that the atua that it links to is tane mahuta, so forest, and the stuff on the, oh no, not so much tane mahuta actually. Rongo matane. I think, oh, I can't remember if it has a mac on. Okay, so that's cultivated crops. Okay, and then the other one is haumia tike. So that's, I'll just put wild foods. So it's like fern root and foods that you go out and gather. Okay, so planted on purpose versus foods we go out into nature and gather. Okay,
And
all right.
Remembering to show appreciation for the food that we have, that we can get in New Zealand.
Exactly, appreciation for the kai we have, you know, I guess, and its abundance, you know, looking into, I think, you know, we all know that people who grow up in the Western world are super entitled. You know, we actually just even the fact, I think it's something like 3% of the world have running water inside their house. You know, just little things like that. Kids in New Zealand don't actually have a clue as to how fortunate they are. Even our children who are living in definite poverty, you know, it's all relevant, isn't it? It's not, yeah, it is all relevant, and it's, you know, we actually need to often take a step back and stop moaning. You know, that phrase that really annoys me is that first world problems. I'm just like, you know, it shouldn't even exist. It's very entitled. So yeah, I think teaching our tamariki to be super grateful for what they've got and thankful of this whole idea. You know, some people keep a gratitude journal and stuff like that. You know, for me, that's just an intrinsic part of who I am, because, you know, coming from a Christian perspective, you know, we sort of taught for that gratitude and thankfulness. But I think it's a very good life lesson that can definitely be taken on by a large portion of the population, you know, the Karens of the world, shall we say.
Gotta love a Karen. So I'm just conscious of time, Anita, and the fact that these lovely people will move on soon.
So we're up to star number 5, so that means we've got 4 left. Are we happy to stay online for another 10-15 minutes while we finish them? Is that okay? Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Right, where are we? So tupuarangi should be quite easy. I think we've done most of the kai side of things. So connected with everything that grows up in the trees, fruits, berries, birds. So it's food from above our head. So food from above.
Does it also fit with the environmental connectivity around, you know, without the birds eating the berries and then pooping, then they don't grow new ones. So that sort of, not, I guess, not food change, but how we all rely on ecosystems. That's the better way.
I guess, but coming back to that idea, we're all part of something much larger than ourselves. And there's nothing quite like going out into nature and having a look around and going, wow, you know, wow, our world is awesome. You know, we, no matter what creation narrative you believe in, or whether you don't believe in one at all, Big Bang, etc., you can't escape the fact that nature in and of itself is fascinating, and how it's the design behind the whole thing is just, you know, will blow your mind. And there's something. So what should we just put? Perhaps the design of line of nature and interactions. I don't know,
Right.
balance. I don't know really where that fits in, but I think for me that also fits in with appreciation as well, because
And mindfulness.
appreciation, yeah, mindfulness, yeah. So all of that stuff that we were talking about earlier in terms of mindfulness, emotions, calming, you know. So I think stuff like you know, exercise. Exercise for health and well-being. To me, that's, you know, that idea of getting outdoors, etc. All of that stuff we've already sort of talked about. What else? So that stuff that's to do with taha wairua, etc. So I'll just put that down here. Taha wairua, taha hinengaro, taha chinana. That's our physical side, you know. So yeah, and I think what was the other thing I was thinking of? So definitely kaitiakitanga comes back in here again, and maybe this idea of, you know, looking at what our environment was when NZ was covered in forest. Like often I think links to Tāne Mahuta, because he's our guy here. So I often think, well, I think Ngāhere and Tāne Mahuta, you know, Tāne Mahuta is actually gone from most of New Zealand. It's all been, you know, burnt down and turned into farms and cities, you know. So what is, you know, what impact, I guess you could call it the impact of colonization, the impact of human beings. To me, that's, I don't know where that really fits in. And
our responsibilities as human beings in the future.
Yeah.
So it's looking ahead.
Yeah, planning ahead for future generations, you know. We don't want to leave a world that's destroyed behind us, that kind of stuff. Oh gosh, we're getting fast, aren't we? So let's just do our next one. So our next two are to do with the weather. So we have waipunarangi. So as you know, wai means water. I'm just gonna, sometimes it's just waipunaarangi or yeah, anyway, I'll put it like that for now. So waipunarangi talks about, the little description here is that it's connected with rain. So we did cover rain slightly in our earlier bit to do with YT, the fresh water. So this is a little sort of extension of that, I guess. So I'll just put links to YT fresh water. But I think there's certainly, I think everyone can, I think this really just comes to back to that, you know, well-being. What does it feel like to go outside in the rain? That idea of water being quite a cleansing kind of thing, you know. This is like, there's nothing quite like the feeling of rain on your face, is there? And I think perhaps, you know, looking to the, just, I don't know, the purpose, you know, of water, links to emotions. Obviously we link into tawhirimatia. Okay, so tawhirimatia, emotions, etc. Matariki story. Remember, he's the main dude behind the story, of course. So water is also the expression of sadness from Rangi Nui for losing Papatua Nuku. Remember, from our story from last week. Any other ideas around this one?
Rain is healing, and it washes things away.
Yep, so healing. Well, it does, and I think it washes the dirt and destruction away. And I guess and
it feeds our kai, it feeds our plants.
People.
Yeah.
Growth. New growth.
New growth. Yeah, let's sort of think about spring here, spring rains, you know, but it can also cause destruction, you know. We think about cyclones and all of that. So emotions. So I'm just going to put emotions, storms, you know, stormy feelings. So, you know, we can link that stuff back to some of the stuff we've talked about. Is that enough for that one? I think so. For now. Yeah, okay, so our other one is to do with the weather. And remember, these two stars are up above in the constellation. So let's just pop that in there. This star is up above the rest of the stars in the constellation. So that idea, it's up in the sky. One thing that I'll actually put in here is this idea of looking up to the heavens, okay, or sky. So it actually ties in with perhaps looking to the future, knowledge being passed down, because if you from those gone before, those above us in our genealogy, because that idea of tuku iho. So in our food karakia, we say ko rangi nui e tu iho. So rangi nui is standing, iho, you know, looking down upon us. So I think that could be quite a good little connection in there. All right, so our fella Ururangi, he is the one connected with the wind, okay? And it's quite interesting, in Te Reo Māori, there are a lot of different words to describe different types of winds. And it reminds me, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the fact that in, what's they called? We shouldn't use the term Eskimo anymore, sort of Native American. Inuit. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so when we look at winds, you know, we have winds are, you know, refreshing. I get this idea of sort of blowing out the cobwebs. Makes me think of babies, you know, when you can't settle your baby, you take him outside and walk up and down the driveway. And just the simple act of the fact that there's winds blowing on their face usually means they pipe down, you know, and calm down. So that's sort of the first thing that pops into my head. I don't know about you guys. What else have we got around winds? Looking at the Māori here. Yes?
Pollination.
Oh, nice. Pollination. Spreading seeds, etc. Yeah, and so that's our links into the environment. And I guess if we look, what's our picture? Sorry, I've got the wrong picture on here. Let me just copy in the right one. Yeah, so we've got birds, flight. You know, there's so I think a lot of the same stuff from the other side. So tāwhiri mātia and tāne mahuta. Okay, so winds, birds, forests, let's just call it regeneration, perhaps, plants, that's that sort of thing, you know, all tied up. I think the idea of, I quite like the idea of, I don't know, should we call it birds soaring on the wind? You know, that idea of perhaps, you know, looking to the future. We have a lot of phrases like that, don't we? Like spread your wings and soar. That I think that idea, does it tie into resilience a little bit? Thinking of that.
Yeah, look,
great destruction.
yeah.
And
sorry, what's that?
because of great destruction from winds, you have to be resilient to build it all back up again.
Well, that's only in the Hutt Valley.
Wellington, you know.
So this idea of destruction from winds and rays and rebuilding, you know, trying new ways of doing things, you know, this idea of growth. Now, funnily enough, speaking of the old growth mindset, of course, is very, very popular. But I heard a really interesting discussion in Māori on some webinar recently, and they were sort of ripping apart the fact that all of the mainstream schools are teaching growth mindset, because within Te Ao Māori, you just always have that mindset. It's just normal. It's not a skill that we have to teach, you know, and even the idea of making mistakes and learnings, like this idea of resilience and aroha and being kind to others and all the rest of it is just inbuilt in Māori values and the way the world operates. So I did think that was quite an interesting interesting comments, perhaps. Why are we actually having to teach kids things like the growth mindset? If our society was actually kinder to people when they do fail at something, and even this concept of failure within Tau Māori, using ako as a pathway, and maybe we can that might ako as a pathway, because there's this idea of te arapautama, which is the sort of this idea of a staircase to the heavens, or to higher knowledge. And you haven't failed; you're just on a certain step on the staircase, if that makes sense. And then when you've learnt what you need to, you just go up to the next step. So there's not this idea of people meeting standards. My son's report came home with this comment: teacher judgment against expectations, and it was on every single subject. And I thought, what a horrible way to put it of how your child is doing. Firstly, they're using the word judgment, against a whole bunch of expectations, which who knows what's come up with that. We think about the fact that national standards have been ditched now. So I sort of, I don't know. I quite like this idea of, no judgment. We're all on, a journey with many stages. I think we can probably link in a lot of that into this idea of sort of looking above, I don't know. Any other ideas?
Yeah, we can't see the wind, but we believe in it and we can feel it. So we can believe in ourselves.
Very clever.
Yeah, and so once again, I come back to a Bible verse here, which is faith is seeing. Faith is believing in things you can't see, and if we look back to our proverbs that we have within Western culture, most of them have got a biblical base. You go back into the book of Proverbs, you'll find them all in there, like not suffering fools and using wisdom as your best friend. It sort of metaphorically talks of wisdom as being a queen, who should be guiding you. And so when we look into a Māori worldview, all of our whakatauki full of great wisdom, and this idea that we are all part of something bigger, I don't know, I can see, like, it resonates with me quite well, if that makes sense, all of those things. And I think this is where, coming back to that idea of the growth mindset, perhaps sort of coming at it a bit backwards, like, failure is part of life and you've got to learn to get over it. It's probably more that approach. But with a Māori approach, there's no such thing as failure. You're just where you are. And you're in this phase of learning, and then there's another phase. So you remove that sense of hopelessness or self-doubt. It's just not there. And at the end of this phrase here in Māori, kia puria ai au, so that the song Puria Nei is about cleansing. Kia whakahauora tia ai au, so to cleanse me, to whakahauora, to make me well. The English translation doesn't actually really translate the Māori. So by looking back into the te reo, whakahauora, to make myself well. So I think we've really connected in well with that. Okay, so we just got two quickly to finish. So let's do Pōhutukawa next. So remember, that's our star that reminds us of people who came before us. So I think we've done quite a good job of covering that, but let's just relate it into our learning. So remember that idea of reflecting on the past. Okay, so reflecting on the past.
Can it be our past, like, what we did last week? Does that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Lessons.
Learning lessons from what we've done, what possibly
Exactly.
with negative consequences, and learn from it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Learning from our past mistakes.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, not very good there, is it? You know, and once again, that idea of taking on, you know, wisdom from others, whether they're alive or dead. You know, I think, you know, being part of something bigger, connectedness, whakapapa, all of that comes in here, and definitely dealing with emotions of sadness, you know, depression, anxiety. Sorry?
Grief and loss, all those things come into that.
Yeah, grief, loss, etc. And I think perhaps talking about different kinds of loss, because, you know, I imagine the loss of you know, so obviously we've got, you know, whānau members and those memories, but we've also got things like loss of friendships, divorce, separation, you know, from family. Look at all the poor children who haven't been able to see parents or grandparents or extended family overseas. That must be rife at the moment. You know, people who've moved house, town, I don't know, country.
Does it have to be the negative though? Can be the positive as well, like celebrating.
No, I think so. Yeah. So
right.
so from our positive perspective, you know, that's where we're coming into. What did he? Sir Tiffany O'Regan, who just got New Zealand of the Year. Something he said in one of the videos. What did he say? Without remembering.
The past, we can't change the future. Is it something like that?
Something like that. It's this thing that he always says. Without remembering. Well, no, what does he say?
It is something about we can't move forward without looking to the past. And
yeah, it is that whakatauki again, sort of without building memories, you know, we can't remember to build a future. Something along those lines. I'll get the exact line. It was in one of those Indigenous 100 videos I was watching last night. So I highly recommend watching them. They are all in Te Reo Māori, but there are subtitles. You know. So yeah, right. Well, I think we've done Pohutakawa.
I was just thinking about one aspect of our personality and about our uniqueness is that we are a product of all of our ancestry.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, the person sitting in front of you or looking at you in the mirror is made up of all the DNA, all of the hopes and dreams of the past.
Oh, that's right. And you know, we can link that into parenting. You know, every parent wants to do better than their own mum or dad. You know, so thinking into the future, that's definitely a great link. Great, awesome stuff. I think we've done the work for the whole country here, ladies. Sort of the what we like to call perhaps a kitchen table kaupapa.
Like it.
So Hiwa Itirangi is our star looking to the future. So Hiwa Itirangi is the star connected with granting our wishes and realizing our aspirations for the new year. So yeah, kind of lamely translated as the wishing star, but you know, not really. All right, so aspirations for the future, including learning from our past experiences, ancestral wisdom, etc. So
it's sort of our goal setting, that if I think about it with a
definitely
Western hat on. Yeah.
Goal setting for the next 12 months and the rest of our lives. You know, and I think let's bring in here not just for us as individuals, you know, but as a group, as a whānau, you know, let's bring in that idea of kotahitanga and whanaungatanga, you know, with a friend, you know, and let's remember that our hopes and dreams can be in, I think this idea in any area of our lives, learning, personality, you know, activities, personality, activities, career. You know, it's not just I want to learn to get better at multiplication tables or something. That's probably the level that anyone, so a lot of the schools will do this activity where they'll get the kids to write their learning goal for the next year on a star and put it up on the wall. Now, while I have no problem with that, that's not really going to the depth that we probably need to be thinking about. Yeah, I guess in hopes for our friends and family, the country.
It's also going to be learning about leadership, working as a team to accomplish the goals.
Yeah, teamwork and
making positive decisions, both, you know, in the real world, online, so that we're putting our best foot forward, or I guess it's being the best that we can be.
I like that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
how those decisions will affect others.
Oh yes,
Because that often comes up as a question. How do my decisions affect those around me?
does it also fit in with reputation?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put that in manaakitanga, how we treat others, reputation. So can you kind of see how, if we go back to our first slide here, those 4 values really just cover everything, you know? In fact, you could probably teach for the rest of your teaching career just using Matariki. You know, thank goodness it comes round once every year. And
that was a question I've written down to ask you, actually, Anita, is I've got 2 questions which relate to that. Can you use the analogies of the stars in Matariki at the whole year, like, or is that not?
Absolutely.
You can?
Absolutely.
And the other thing I was wondering is, you know, looking at some of these, and we've gone very broad. It's not just the what you see, it's how you interpret it in regards to, you know, like granting wishes might just be, what do I want to do? But then you look at it more wider. If you were teaching a class, is it appropriate to, like, depending on what you're doing, to actually use the idea of one of the stars and sort of explain what that star is, and then use that throughout the session? Like,
yeah, I would
one?
use it. Yeah, I would use the stars as a discussion prompt, I guess. You know, a learning prompt, and that's probably really where our connection comes in. You know, Waiti is our star to do with waters. You know, what does water signify in our life? And you would be surprised what people would come up with. I mean, even just thinking about it now, I'm thinking about the fact that people get baptized or christened with water. You know, there's just so much stuff, you know, like one of you guys raised, it's one of the essential elements of life: water, food, and shelter, isn't it? You know, water quality. Oh gosh, you could go on forever, couldn't you? The fact that our bodies emit 78% water or whatever it is. And, you know, that question, ko waikwe, who are you, or ko wai toingoa, there's a lot of significance that word who is the word wai. But it literally means which waters are you? You know, what waters flow through you? And so we can think about those waters being that DNA, like we were talking about. Yeah, you could just go on forever. It's such a cool way of looking at the world.
So you can,
and it really is sort of endless.
You can just sort of talk about one in isolation.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I think
cool.
so. But I think you'd also probably just be aware that, you know, I think this whole idea of Matariki being the mum, you know. So Matariki, we often use, we call it te kāhui o Matariki, the cluster of Matariki. Kāhui is that same word from kāhui ako, you know, cluster of learning. But Matariki actually being the mum, I don't think many people even know that. So we can look, you know, what do we get from our mums or our female figures in our life, you know. So let's just sort of put there the role of mums, adults, parents. role models. I think that's, there's that sort of idea. So I think Matariki kind of draws it all together, the actual star of Matariki, because when we look down here, we've got that idea of reflection, hope, connection to the environment, gathering of people, health and well-being, Yeah. So, and remember, traditionally every year, experts like Rangi Matamua's great-grandfather, they would look at the stars and they would read them, and the brightness and dimness of different stars and the combination thereof was a way to predict what was going to happen, in the forthcoming year. So, and I think as we kind of delve deeper into the idea of maramataka, I can see a few more workshops coming out of that. I think, that's quite exciting. And I think that's probably something to focus on for the future, starting with these 9 stars of Matariki, but as we explore further into how we can integrate Mātauranga Māori into learning. I'm actually just going to leave these 2 slides in there as well. I'll just put te kāhui or Matariki in here. So that's that idea of kāhui. Oh no, it's already there. Oh, we'll put te iwa. So and even just things like perhaps showing that family tree, this one. And then there's those other 2 images there out of Rangi Matamua's book. You can use this illustration here to show the relationship in the sky, like Waiti being above Waita, Ururangi and Waipunarangi being up above, up in the sky. It's just a cool visual tool, isn't it? Using things like these cool little diagrams here. And when you look closely at the diagrams here, see Waita's got fish next to him and Waiti's got the eels next to her, and not really sure. Puhutaka was sort of looking up to the future, looking up to the stars, remembering those who've gone past. I'm not quite sure what he was doing. Waipunarangi, the wind, and often Waipunarangi will be shown with like tears, maybe. Ururangi's looking a bit windswept. Tupuarangi's looking down from above, because it's a star with food from above our head and those birds. And then Tupanuku's got kumara, next to her. And Matariki's just looking awesome and wide there, and is usually the biggest and brightest of the stars. So when we come back to here, you can see that. So I think that's sort of this is what we were looking about. That was the ideas for the next session. Well, I'm not really sure if we met those, but I think we did.
I think we did pretty well, Anita.
I think we did pretty well. So congratulations on an hour and a quarter of hour and a half of brainstorming. But I think that was well worth doing, So I haven't actually sent out a copy of the slides, Tracy. I don't think that occurred to me today.
No, that would be great to get those.
I'll put that on my to-do list for tomorrow. I've got no problems with you sharing those with all the educators.
Wonderful. We'll pop those up with the recording so that those who are not here
download slides for life here.
Can see our magic.
That's right. And I think, look, you've actually kind of written the content for another whole workshop, 2 or 3 workshops I'm doing. So thanks for that. And look, I hope everyone does have a nice break over the holidays. And yoo-hoo, that there's actually a holiday for Matariki too. And as Rangi Matamua says in this little video, I'll post up. I'm going to be viewing that video now that I was talking about. So I'll post up that video as well. And I'll get, do you want me to get those 3 video clips I was talking about? We'll pop them up on YouTube.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think that the full video will just be available under the website login, but I'll single out those little clips because obviously that will do. And how are we going with sign-ups for next term? Are some of your other colleagues quite keen to join in? And
we've got lots. I'm bringing a spreadsheet together and I'll send that through to you tomorrow, Anita.
Now we've actually got a form that you can just give them to register now online. I've just been experimenting with it yesterday. So that's what you can do.
For next time we will do that.
It's called self-registration.
Wow, that would be lovely next time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll just finish off with a closing karakia. Kia tau iho kia tātou katoa te rangi Māori e te manaakitanga me te aroha. Tuturu whakamaua kia tīna. Tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. What a cool session. Love it.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to retire now. Let's see you all next term.
Yeah.
And I'll get all the info together tomorrow for you all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks so much. That was great. All right. Kia ora.
Okay. Thanks, Anita.
See ya.